This is a photograph of Michael Saylor from a few days ago when he appeared on television being interviewed about the then upcoming executive order and strategic Bitcoin reserve. It was very clear that he knew something because of how much he was smiling, and I made this meme laughing about the fact that he was smiling so much when he typically doesn't when he's interviewed on television. I know that you know that I know that you know that all of your models are destroyed. And definitely, I was not disappointed with what happened in the following 72 hours after that interview. As you surely know, unless you're living under a rock, Donald Trump has now passed a Bitcoin strategic reserve via executive order. And of course, they had the crypto summit soon after that on Friday. So in today's video, we're going to do the full breakdown. I gave some initial thoughts, both in video and written form, of my thoughts on the event, but in this video, I want to really break it down because this was, in my opinion, was a very, very historic and important moment for Bitcoin. I think it's going to be one that is very important for the US and for Bitcoin at large in the coming months and the coming years. And I think the important people to pay attention to, their opinions are going to evolve over time. So I just want to give my full opinions of what I like, what I don't like, what I wanted to see more of, what I hope to see more of in the future. So I'm going to break down in this video the top 8 people I think are worth paying attention to. We're going to talk about strategies for the United States to acquire future Bitcoins that were outlined within the executive order. We're going to talk about how far we've actually come. Like, this is a really big step in Bitcoin's history. And also, we're going to talk about what comes next. I firmly believe, even though Bitcoin price disappointed some short-term minded, low IQ people, immediately after the announcement of it, all the traders wanted to gamble on it. I do think we should talk about the very long term, not just in terms of weeks or months or quarters, but in terms of years and decades. Like, what is actually the next step? Because now that this has happened, a lot of people are asking, okay, now what? Like, how much bigger can you get? You got the United States stacking Bitcoin. Like, how much bigger can it become? So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about addressing common criticisms of the executive order and the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Whenever you see EO, that means executive order. Whenever you see SBR, that means strategic Bitcoin reserve. We're going to talk about something that applies to you all, right? Most of this video is going to be talking about things outside of your control, but in this video, I'm also going to talk about something within your control that's an actionable step that you can take to increase your Bitcoin stack. Basically, in the same way the United States is creating its own strategic Bitcoin reserve, you have the opportunity to create your own strategic Bitcoin reserve, including all kinds of financial products racing towards your way, including Bitcoin-denominated loans under 8% interest. We'll talk more about that later in the video, something that's going to be very compelling and I think change the entire landscape of the market. And of course, to conclude the video, we will talk about where we'll go from here and the 3 things specifically I would like to see from Donald Trump next coming up. So, without a further ado, let's get into the video. This is a post from Bo Hines from a couple days ago of the signing of the reserve. You might have seen the video. We'll talk more about these individuals in just a moment, but of course, Donald Trump, the most famous / infamous / controversial president / political figure on the planet of the last decade or so. Signing this is a really big deal. Definitely gets a lot of excitement. Elon Musk is one of the people that are being forgotten about right now. However, Elon Musk was in the room when the executive order was signed. Elon has been very silent about Bitcoin. I'll talk about that more in just a few moments, but that I think is also something noteworthy that he was there in the room. But this is what the room looked like. You have David Sachs, Bo Hines, Elon Musk, and then Donald Trump on the right as he's signing the document. And then, of course, the following day, that was on Thursday, this picture here, or these pictures are from Friday, the crypto summit immediately following the executive order back on Thursday. There were maybe 50 or so people there at this large square arrangement of tables. Of course, Donald Trump there in the middle, right under the portrait of Abraham Lincoln, which, as a side note, I think is quite poetic, given a lot of Lincoln's history with issuing of greenbacks, his leadership in the Civil War, amid other things. Of course, you got your favorite Bitcoin maxi on the panel there, the one with the only orange tie, Michael Saylor, giving applause in the picture there. Some other pictures of the event. You've probably seen this. We'll talk about some of these individuals in just a moment. Donald Trump, David Sachs, Howard Lutnick's there too. There's Trump. You can see Saylor's tie in the background and everyone else there. Brian Armstrong is behind Bo in that picture there. So you've seen the pictures. You've seen this picture I find quite funny, given Michael's, let's say, seriousness. If you watch the video, which we will in just a moment, he's has a lot more stern of a face. I'll get into that more in a moment. But the big deal from these pictures that I found very exciting is that, you know, we obviously have hardcore Bitcoin advocates within earshot of Trump, literally within this picture, but then also metaphorically within the rest of the Trump administration over the course of the next couple of years. We're going to talk about these individuals. And I mentioned here information asymmetry. I really do believe that. Information asymmetry, meaning that if you are the nerd that has been paying attention to this, most people aren't even aware that it's happening, and most people that are aware that it's happening have very negative things to say about it, which we will talk to more in just a moment. But getting back to the pictures and getting back to the critical key individuals involved, I want to go through really quickly the key 8 people personally I'm paying attention to immediately right now, then also in the coming years. I suspect these are going to be the individuals that are going to be the movers and shakers within the Trump administration and within Bitcoin acceleration, right? So, you know, these are historical figures in the same way people remember Seward with, you know, the purchase of Alaska or with the Louisiana purchase and everything else. I think these are going to be people that we're going to want to pay attention to their evolving opinions over time, because I think we're going to see a lot of progress. And if these people better understand Bitcoin, I think that's going to be really critical for the United States. So the main 8 voices, of course, Donald Trump is one of them, right? The president, most famous / infamous, whatever your opinion of him is, you can't disregard that he is the most famous and influential person of the last decade. You can't deny that. His net worth is approximately $5 billion. Now, Donald Trump's evolution so far with Bitcoin has been, for me, pretty remarkable and much faster than I expected. Donald Trump, you know, 5 to 10 years ago, shoot, even 3 years ago, was very Bitcoin neutral, in some cases hostile against Bitcoin, both in public settings and in private settings, because he viewed Bitcoin as competition to the US dollar. However, much of this list will be talking about how this administration is starting to understand Bitcoin's not a threat against the US dollar. It is in the long term, but in the medium term, Bitcoin is actually a benefit to the US dollar. We'll get to that more in just a moment. Of course, individual number 2 is Michael Saylor. Of course, you all know and love him. Controls about 500,000 Bitcoin via his company MicroStrategy, now known as Strategy. I would argue that of this list, Michael Saylor is the quote-unquote farthest in the future of the Summit Group, probably pretty much everyone on the panel here. Michael Saylor, I would argue his understanding of Bitcoin is probably the deepest. I would argue his technical understanding is probably the deepest. And his understanding of the historical significance of them, I would argue, is the deepest. Why? Because Michael Saylor understands this event and this whole Bitcoin idea is a matter of national security, not only of a wealth stockpile. There's evidence for that based upon Michael Saylor's letter to the president, which we'll get into more in just a moment later in the deep dive. Some keys of Saylor, this is also noteworthy, I think. Some keys of Michael Saylor's vaults for MicroStrategy are with Coinbase. Brian Armstrong is next to him there in the red tie. You know, we'll talk about this more in a few minutes when it comes to your personal strategic Bitcoin reserve and the importance of multi-sig. But MicroStrategy, now known as Strategy, has multiple multi-sig vaults, numerous multi-sig vaults. We don't know the locations of all the keys, but we do know some of their multi-sig vaults have some of their keys with Coinbase, Brian Armstrong being next to Michael. Brian seems to be the person Michael talked to the most at the summit, at least when the cameras were rolling. Let's get back to his little summary here. Michael Saylor is, in my opinion, a contender for the world's second, maybe third trillionaire. Pretty much it's Michael Saylor, Satoshi, and Elon Musk that are the 3 main competitors for the world's first trillionaire. Michael Saylor's net worth is approximately $8 billion, which is a little more than 40-50% more than Donald Trump's. Again, depending on the day and the price of Bitcoin. Howard Lutnick. Howard Lutnick is sitting to the left side of the picture here. Many of you watching may recognize him. Some of you watching may not recognize him. This is a really important individual to pay attention to. You know, again, some of these individuals, if you're in Bitcoin, you may not know these people, but they're going to be really important when it comes to the price of Bitcoin and when it comes to the United States adoption of Bitcoin. So that's Howard Lutnick on the left side of the video. We'll see a video of him later in this video I'm making today. Who's Howard Lutnick? Howard Lutnick is Trump's Secretary of Commerce. Lutnick's been a big supporter of Donald Trump, especially in recent years. Yeah, you get rid of the dollar sign there. Howard Lutnick owns, quote unquote, thousands of Bitcoin. Hundreds of millions of dollars is what he said, which implies multiple thousands of Bitcoin. So Howard is a major Bitcoin holder and investor. A large portion of his personal net worth is in Bitcoin, which is really important to note. He is the former chairman and CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald. He owns over 50-60% of the stock of Cantor Fitzgerald, I believe. He has bought $1 billion worth of MicroStrategy stock, now known as Strategy. So you got Howard on the left of this photo, Michael Saylor on the right. That's really important to keep in mind, that these individuals are putting their money where their mouth is and not only just talking into the wind. Howard literally bought $1 billion of Saylor's stock in late last quarter. He's down on that position because MicroStrategy stock is down significantly since the November high. However, I think he has a long-term vision of it if you're buying $1 billion worth of the stock. Howard is eager to expand the reserve. He has hinted at that in interviews since then. He's a major Tether investor and supporter. He's got a couple $1 billion of net worth, and via Cantor Fitzgerald, they're looking at doing multiple $1 billion worth of lending products for Bitcoin, which again, we'll talk about more in just a moment, about how you can have Bitcoin loans very cheap and affordable to you as you create your own strategic reserve. Next, we're going to talk about David Sacks really quick. If you don't know who he is, he's one of the most famous, or he's one of the big famous guys in the All In podcast, a very popular finance podcast that exploded on the scene maybe 3 years ago or so. And David Sacks, I think, is probably one of the most underrated individuals right now. Personally, I've been very surprised. I've been pleasantly surprised by David's performance. David has, I was skeptical. I'll admit that. I was skeptical of Donald Trump tapping on Mr. Sacks to be involved. However, he has surprised me pleasantly, and that's really important, in my opinion, because David Sacks, of all these people we've looked at so far, is probably the person Donald Trump leans on the most. He leans on David Sacks way more than Michael Saylor. Not as much as Elon Musk, obviously, but David and Trump are really tight because David was a major campaign fundraiser for Donald Trump from the VC environment, and also a big narrative push. He got Donald Trump on some really big podcasts. And so of everyone, I think David Sacks is probably the person that Trump's paying the most attention to when it comes to all things of Bitcoin. That's why he calls him the quote unquote crypto czar. If you watch the video of when Trump actually signed the executive order, it's pretty clear to me that in my opinion, Trump does not have the conviction in the executive order. He has conviction in the idea, but he doesn't understand it deeply, in my opinion, because very clearly from the video, he was asking David Sacks a lot of basic questions and basically asking David, you believe in this bill, right? You're the one that is backing this, right? And David was like, yes, we believe in this. This is good. So really, in my opinion, most people are looking at Trump and saying, oh, Trump's bullish on Bitcoin. Really, I think you got to look past Trump and look at David, because David's opinions of what Bitcoin are in the coming months, basically, in my opinion, will become Trump's opinions, or they will dramatically influence Trump's opinions. So that's why I think David is a really important individual to keep an eye out for, because if you can keep ahead on what you think David's opinions are, you can probably keep ahead on guessing what Trump is going to do next. Like I said, David is one of Trump's closest advisors in all things Bitcoin. He's a major campaign fundraiser. He's the quote-unquote crypto czar for Donald Trump. He has held firm publicly, not advocating for taxes on crypto transactions. That was a very pleasant surprise to me, and I appreciate that. He has also floated the idea of the government selling Ethereum and other digital tokens and securities for Bitcoin. That was a pleasant surprise to me. He's kept very firm on Bitcoin remaining, or the reserve remaining Bitcoin only. That was another pleasant surprise to me. His net worth, he's a billionaire. Who knows exactly how many billions of dollars. The main reason I'm surprised in all these things is because there's a very unfortunate, infamous clip of David a few years ago of where he was dumping insider tokens onto people during the All In podcast. It's something they were joking about at investors' expense. So that's something that was a bit of a black mark coming into it. David's had a bit of controversy from the public, which we'll get into more in just a moment, the public's reaction to this. But all I have to say is that that's why it's important to keep track of David, because what David thinks is going to probably be what Trump thinks. As you can tell, he's literally sitting next to Trump, and he was the guy that Trump was joking with and making sure during the signing that he approved of it. You got Scott Bessent, the Secretary of the Treasury, who was sitting in between Howard Lutnick and Donald Trump during the summit. Why does he matter? Why is he important? He had between $250,000 to $500,000 worth of Bitcoin ETF before becoming Secretary of the Treasury. Of course, he had to divest that to comply with regulations as he was nominated to become the Treasury. He has been on television recently talking more broadly about the market. He's probably pretty important to pay attention to because he's been implying pretty heavily that the Trump administration is comfortable with market volatility, with the stock market struggling for a while. He's been commenting a lot on the recent tariffs that Trump is proposing and advocating for. So, definitely he's trying to prepare the market for some pain and volatility. It seems to me that Scott, Lutnick, Trump are willing to have market downturns and volatility in the short term for the sake of leveraging negotiations, getting agreements that they believe are advantageous to the United States, whether they are or not. It's what they believe is in the best interest. So that's important to keep in mind of what's going on. Like I said, I think it's important to keep in mind he had a Bitcoin vested interest. However, it was a very small allocation, to be frank, given the fact that his net worth is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. I didn't find any resources saying he's a billionaire, but his net worth is apparently hundreds of millions of dollars. He's also important because in the reserve, which we'll get to more in just a moment, him and Lutnick are the two guys that are tasked with helping the United States buy more Bitcoin in addition to the Bitcoins they have already gotten. Now let's talk about some other individuals. Paolo Ardino, the Tether CEO, he's also very important in my opinion, if not one of the most underrated people in this entire advocation of Bitcoin / crypto. He wasn't in the picture here. In fact, he isn't even really in the video. He's off in the back somewhere. However, I think he's a really important individual when it comes to this. Personally, I'm biased because he and I had dinner about 8-10 months ago. Michael Saylor invited him, me, and a few other people to dinner. And so, I learned a lot about what him and Tether were working on at the time. And so, of course, I'm biased to that, just sharing that bias personally. However, I do think it's going to be really important because of especially something that Scott said during the summit about the importance of stablecoins for US dollar dominance. We'll get to that more in just a moment. Tether is the highest profit per employee business on the planet. They make $13 billion a year. They made $13 billion last year. Tether is one of the largest buyers of US treasuries on earth. They're in the top 20, top 15 or so of treasury buyers on the planet, which is really important for the people in charge of the United States, for the people in charge of making sure that people are actually buying our treasuries. I believe Paolo is very critical for demand for treasuries and for dollars probably a decade from now. Obviously still very influential today, but Tether I think is going to be a really big deal for enshrining dollar hegemony in the coming decade. I think it's totally possible to foresee another billion people starting to use dollars because of stablecoins, and Tether is by far the world's largest and longest lasting stablecoin. His net worth is a few $1 billion because he owns a large percentage of Tether. Elon Musk, of course, is another very important, influential individual. He was not present at this crypto summit, neither was Jason Lowery. Why are these two individuals two of the 8 people I'm keeping eyes on personally? Well, obviously it's because Elon Musk owns about 8,000 Bitcoin via his company SpaceX. You've surely seen all the rockets that go up and more importantly come back down. Of course, Tesla still owns about 11,000 Bitcoin. I'm missing a zero there. Sorry for the typo. But in total, Elon Musk has got about 20,000 Bitcoin plus whatever he has personally. He's hinted before on camera that he might have more Bitcoin personally. However, he said it's a very small number in relation to his equity in his major companies, most predominantly SpaceX and Tesla. Elon has said some correct things and some incorrect things about Bitcoin. Elon has correctly emphasized that AI cannot crack Bitcoin. Elon Musk, as you probably know, is a major, if not the most major proponent of advocating people to be cautious of the rapid development in AI. Obviously, he's got Grok, his own AI company. So he's, considered one of the world's experts on AI. He's definitely correct. AI cannot crack Bitcoin. So he's been very pro Bitcoin in the past with those statements. However, he has made factually incorrect criticisms of block size trade-offs of Bitcoin versus other blockchains and technologies. So I'm skeptical Elon fully understands that. I'm not saying he's dumb. I'm not saying I'm smarter than him. I'm just saying, dang, if I was controlling like $1 trillion of business enterprise value, I may not have time to learn about digital magic internet money. He's been very noticeably silent on Bitcoin for years, which I think is something noteworthy to keep tabs on because he's just not talked about it. He was literally in the room with the executive order signing, and he's not tweeted about it. He's not posted about it. Okay, Elon, as you all probably know, especially if you're on Twitter, now known as X, is very vocal about a wide variety of issues. And so it is very interesting, if not suspicious to me personally, of why he is not commenting on it. Okay, clearly someone that is as flippant as he is with his posts online, there has to be a reason why he's not talking about Bitcoin. In my opinion, it's either because, one, he doesn't care, and that I think is totally possible. Maybe he literally just doesn't care. Another possible avenue, I think, is that maybe he's secretly buying Bitcoin and he doesn't want to pump it. He got a lot of criticism when he was talking about Dogecoin a couple years ago, and so maybe he's trying to avoid that. Another possible avenue is because his company's already owned close to 20,000 Bitcoin. Maybe he feels conflict. I don't know, but I think that's something important to keep tabs on. Because again, Donald Trump really respects Elon Musk, and Elon Musk, to some people's dismay, to other people's praise, is very influential in the government. And so if Elon Musk suddenly changes his tune on Bitcoin, mostly being by expressing an opinion on Bitcoin, I think that's something very noteworthy to keep an eye on. Does Elon continue to be silent, or does he actually start talking about it? Also, of course, not only has he been silent on Bitcoin, he's got plenty of money. He's got $1/3 of $1 trillion. He's well on his way to becoming a trillionaire. Again, in main competition, in my opinion, with Michael Saylor and Satoshi Nakamoto. Satoshi, I think, is probably going to be first. His net worth is approximately $1/3 of $1 trillion. Jason Lowery, I also think, is another voice to keep in mind. Some of you watching love him. Others of you have a neutral, if not negative, opinion. I still think he's one of the top 8 people to keep tabs on, keep in mind of, because his vision, his idea of a quote-unquote soft war thesis is, in my opinion, at least a decade more advanced and farther along than any of these other individuals we talked about. However, I think it is really important because, if he starts expressing certain opinions, if he starts saying certain things that the U.S. is going a certain direction, be ready for the Bitcoin price to dramatically go upwards, right? So the signal in all this with these main 8 individuals is that all of the critical individuals involved that I just listed here, all of them have certain things to critique, others have other things to praise, but whatever your political opinions, I would encourage you to set that aside and focus on all of them are competent. Whether you think that's competence in a good or bad direction, all of them are competent. All of them are invested in Bitcoin, and all of them are signaling the direction of the United States strategically. If they weren't saying anything about Bitcoin, I would be concerned. And if they were going way too all out with Bitcoin immediately, I would also be very concerned. They're being very strategic. They're signaling to the market what they're going to do with plenty of notice. They're clearly thinking things through. And that's what I care much more about. I would rather have slow and gradual adoption that is thought through methodically versus rapid adoption that's just kind of sling it on the wall, let's see what happens. That's something I'm very happy about seeing. Of course, there are other influential individuals that are very popular right now involved with the United States government. JD Vance has, I believe, 6 Bitcoin on Coinbase. According to the filings of, when he was becoming vice president. Robert Kennedy, of course, has become a major Bitcoin investor over the last 2 years. He has said, however, there's not been any proof to my understanding that he put most of his net worth into Bitcoin, which is, I think, a little under 100 million, although I don't know that. Somebody fact check me. Brian Armstrong, of course, is very influential. In my opinion, he's not nearly as critical as the other individuals we've talked about so far, because I think Coinbase's big business model is in the past, not in the future. I think this is evidenced by the recent loan product that Coinbase has unveiled. It is far inferior to the kinds of loan products rapidly accelerating towards us. You're taking a much higher interest rate with counterparty risk, and it's something I think Coinbase's main business proposition and monopoly is in the past, not in the future. I think Saylor, I think Howard Lutnick via Cantor Fitzgerald, I think Larry Fink and BlackRock, I think that is the future, not the exchanges like Coinbase. Speaking with Larry Fink, I think he's also somebody really important to keep tabs on. Cynthia Loomis, and of course Vivek Ramaswamy, all of them very famous, influential people in the Bitcoin space. So I want to get on, now we've talked about the players and the people. So for the rest of the video, we're going to be talking about the posts that all these individuals have made, giving my speculations of what I think is coming in the future, given where all these individuals are. However, first, before we get to that, I want to talk about something really quick. Just give me one moment here. There's an awesome event coming up in late May, early June of this year in 2025. This kind of crypto summit, right? Maybe you weren't invited to the crypto summit to sit right next to Trump or Saylor, but you are invited to this different kind of summit, a much more family friendly, a lot less of the suit and ties and a lot more of the outdoor nature, family style environment. But this is the kind of summit that you're invited to, and it's still going to be really fun. I think it's still going to be very memorable. This is immediately after the Bitcoin Magazine conference in Vegas in late May of 2025. The dates for this event that I'm co-hosting with a friend are May 29th to June 1st or June 2nd, depending whichever you want. So it's 3 or 4 days, depending on what your schedule allows, at Zion National Park, about 90 minutes outside of Las Vegas. Absolutely beautiful place. This is one of the most underrated parks in the entire United States, in my opinion. It is definitely up there with Yellowstone, Glacier National Park, Yosemite. Beautiful place. If you're anywhere in the United States, if you're already going to the Bitcoin Magazine conference in Vegas, like this is like you're already out there, like why not add this on your list? And some people aren't even going to the main conference. You know, Vegas isn't really their scene. They're more of an outdoors kind of person. So if you like the outdoors, if you want to make friends, if you want to have new connections, you know, meet people that are working in the Bitcoin industry, hang out with me, hang out with other people that are working in Bitcoin full time. It's gonna be a really fun place. Your transportation, lodging, and food is all covered. If you're single, come on over. If couples are coming, husband and wives, this is a great orange pilling experience for the brother or the wife or the kid or whomever. So if there are a few people bringing a family member, feel free to do that. Some people are bringing their entire family. So, you know, everyone is welcome, no matter who you're bringing. All education levels are welcome. We'll have some Bitcoin OGs there with a lot of Bitcoin and, more importantly, a lot of experience. We'll also have some people that are brand new. There'll be hiking during the day, both easy and difficult hikes. There'll be group hangout, Bitcoin talks in the evenings, special guests, special topics. We got all kinds of fun little activities. We got an orange Cybertruck, because why the heck not? We got games, hot tub, more. Most importantly, you can make memories. This is a special event. The main reason I'm doing this is because now that the suits are here, right? Now that the influential people are here, guess what? Bitcoin price is going to go up. Bitcoin is super dirt cheap at 86 grand. It's going to 100 grand, 200 grand, 500 grand, a million, 10 million. It's just going to keep going up. And as more people get involved with Bitcoin, these kinds of events are only get harder and harder to find. So I'm putting it out there right now, encouraging you to give the phone number on the screen a text that you want to join, because, you know, sure, you're never too late to Bitcoin, but you can be too late to being early enough to Bitcoin to make good friends. Back when it was easy to find people that weren't just in Bitcoin for number go up, but also for the mission. So that's all I'll say about that. I won't talk about it any more in this video. So give the phone number a text before you forget if you want to join. So now let's get into the meat and the bones of what actually happened with the executive order, the fact sheet of President Donald J. Trump's establishment of the strategic reserve and the digital asset stockpile. I think the main takeaway here is the separation between the strategic reserve and the digital asset stockpile. I was very happy to see they differentiated and have a distinction between the two. They could always reverse that, of course, but for now, I'm very happy with how this went. So the first thing to note is that the strategic Bitcoin reserve is capitalized with Bitcoin, primarily Bitcoin and only Bitcoin. They're not intending to sell the Bitcoin. And who is in charge with helping the United States buy more Bitcoin? The Secretaries of Treasury and the Secretary of Commerce. Who's the Secretary of Treasury and who's the Secretary of Commerce? Again, Howard Lutnick and Scott, okay? So two Bitcoin investors, before they became secretaries, are now in charge with helping the United States buy more Bitcoin. And Howard Lutnick's got literally over $1 billion of billions of dollars of company value behind Bitcoin, and probably $500 million of his own personal net worth behind Bitcoin. So, you know, if you're asking, okay, who's actually in charge with this? Those are the two individuals, right? That's why it's important to pay attention to them, because their opinions of Bitcoin over time, whether correct or incorrect, are going to influence how much Bitcoin the government is actually stacking. You know, now what's the caveat here? What's the asterisk? They can only buy Bitcoin in ways that are quote unquote tax neutral. For the taxpayers, right? Budget neutral, right? So basically, they can't print money to buy Bitcoin. They can't cost the taxpayers anything to buy Bitcoin. They have to sell other things to buy Bitcoin. They have to sell Ethereum to buy Bitcoin. They have to sell gold to buy Bitcoin. They have to sell federal land or government buildings to buy Bitcoin, right? Now, given the fact that other influential members within the government are very focused on reducing government spending, you know, Elon Musk obviously being the dominant one for that. You know, I'm really curious to see to what degree Do they justify buying Bitcoin and selling other things to buy Bitcoin? But I think that's very optimistic. They didn't pick random people. They picked these guys. We know who these guys are. They've signaled to the market that their opinion is we want America to not stop at the current number of Bitcoins. We want the government to have more Bitcoins. Also, what I'm very excited about is seeing a separation between Bitcoin and the digital asset stockpile. I think that was largely the result of David Sachs. So again, pleasantly surprised with David that he had a separation between the two. Very happy to see that. Then one risk here that I keep thinking about that a lot of people maybe are not reflecting upon is that they can get more Bitcoin and more digital assets via confiscation. So, theoretically, maybe you could argue the government could, take people's Bitcoin. They could take Michael Saylor's Bitcoin, confiscate it, say, oh, this person's a criminal. Let's take all their Bitcoin, and then we would add that to the strategic reserve. Obviously, a lot of people that are paranoid about the government coming after them, I think have a very valid point there. I'm not saying they don't, right? This is one of the reasons why it's critical to have a multi-jurisdictional, multi-sig vault. This is one of the reasons why people that are going to be getting Bitcoin loans are going to be having such far more competitive interest rates, far more competitive things to them, because it's going to be lower risk, right? You don't want all of your keys in the same country, right? If you have a multi-sig vault, you want different keys in different countries so that if any one country does become hostile because they're like, oh, hey, we're in a national stockpile competition against China, and as a matter of national security, we need to take everybody's Bitcoin to stack more. At least your Bitcoin is at least an order of magnitude more difficult to come after because keys are in different countries, right? Obviously, you can always say, oh, I lost my keys in a boating accident. But the reality when the rubber hits the road is that most people aren't willing to risk going to jail time to, and lose time with their families just for the money. So the reality is that by having a multi-jurisdictional vault, you can tell the government the truth, and at the same time, they still can't take your Bitcoin. You're still self-sovereign the Bitcoin because you hold the keys. And at the same time, basically you're protecting yourself against the government, and also to where you don't have to box yourself in a corner where you have to lie to the government, evade the government. And I do not recommend that. That's a very bad plan. So anyway, all I have to say is that that is a bit concerning to me that they're going to confiscate assets, fortified in a quote unquote criminal or civil asset fortitude proceedings. But again, that doesn't seem to be happening. I don't think that's going to happen. I'm not saying or trying to be a fearmonger saying that's going to happen, but we just want to make sure that we're prepared against everything. And so there's lots more covered here, in particular why they're doing this. It's nice to see the White House explicitly mentioning Bitcoin, the only cryptocurrency, is referred to as quote unquote digital gold because of its scarcity and security, having never been hacked, despite every incentive for it to be. With a fixed supply, 21 million coins, there is a strategic advantage to being among the first nations to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. The United States currently holds a significant amount of Bitcoin, but has not maximized its strategic position as a unique store of value in the global financial system. This is, in my opinion, something that David Sachs had a very critical role being involved with, because this is a very similar kind of rhetoric that he's given on recordings and podcasts, which we'll get to more in just a moment. But they're viewing Bitcoin as a means of acquiring more dollars. Premature sales of Bitcoin already cost you as taxpayers over $17 billion, right? And this is the important distinction I really want to get into here for the future. So a metaphor from the 1700s, okay, of, giving a metaphor of Bitcoin today versus the past. Okay, the first era, the first step is that you have time where the locomotive exists before the government gets involved, right? In Bitcoin's case, you had 16 years to be buying and accumulating Bitcoin before the government first bought ownership of a quote unquote train company, right? You had 16 years before the executive order to be buying up your share of those 20 million coins. That time is now over as of this week. That time is done. Era 1 is done. Yes, you are still early to Bitcoin, but it is no longer stupid early, okay? We are now in era 2. We're in step 2, okay? The locomotive now exists. The government says, hey, we can make a lot of money on this whole locomotive train thing. Look at how the locomotive stocks are performing better than all the horse and carriage stocks. Let's buy of some of those locomotive stocks, and then we can use the proceeds or the savings of that locomotive asset stockpile to help our taxpayers, right? And this is the really critical thing. I think it's important to mention. It's why I've been setting up this whole video in this way, right? The critical thing to understand is that, yes, this is very exciting. However, in my opinion, all these individuals here, Howard Lutnick, Scott Bessent, Donald Trump, and David Sachs, those 4 individuals, including Elon Musk, by the way, I believe all of them are still viewing Bitcoin as a means of acquiring more dollars, as a means of acquiring more political power and monetary premium for the country. Okay, I think they view Bitcoin as a means to the end of that goal. Compare that to Michael Saylor on the right-hand side of the picture here. Michael Saylor is doing the completely opposite thing. He is destroying, he is cannibalizing, he is consuming his monetary premium of his corporation to acquire more Bitcoin. He's using at the money all kinds of convertible bonds. He is weakening his fiat premium to strengthen his Bitcoin premium. I believe these other 4 individuals, Trump, Bessent, Lutnick, and Sachs, are very important, very critical, but this is why I'm outlining this whole video like this. If those 4 individuals, or any one of those 4 individuals, start to talk more like Michael Saylor or Paolo or Lowry, instead of more like the Elon Musk, Donald Trump type speech, I think that's really important. I view these guys as still thinking in this second stage here of, hey, the locomotive technology is cool. Why don't we have a locomotive summit and we create a stockpile of ownership in some locomotive companies and hold it because they're going to be more valuable and it's strategic for the United States to own some of that, right? For the sake of the taxpayers, so that we don't lose, a few $1 billion, right? I think that's their mindset. What I think is going to be really interesting to watch is inevitably when we transition into this 3rd era, eventually they're going to figure out, wait a second, guys, we should not have the government be buying locomotive stocks for the sake of making more money so we can convert that money into being able to buy hay for our horses. Wait a moment. If we don't adopt the locomotive, and if we don't move our soldiers and ammo on trains, we will cease to exist. Our factories will be less efficient. We'll be able to move less troops to the front lines. If we cease to adopt this, we will be consumed and taken over by a nation that does adopt this. Having the country adopt a locomotive standard and abandon a horse standard is no longer a matter of leveraging locomotives to preserve the horse. It is now a matter of national security. If we don't do this, we will cease to exist, right? The moment this becomes like I'm saying here, the moment they figure this out and they understand, wait a minute, guys, Bitcoin is not a thing that we should be having to pump up Bitcoin price and then, therefore pump up the quote unquote dollar returns for citizens. But instead, when we view this as like digital Manhattan or cyberspace, where we have to have ownership for the sake of the country 100 years from now, that, in my opinion, is more the line of where Saylor is. And I think if you watch the video, which we will in just a moment, I think that's one of the funny things, is that Saylor seems like on a different level compared to everyone else. Everyone here seems happy and like, oh, this is great, blah, blah, blah. Saylor has a much more focused aura about him during the summer. And I think this is precisely why. Everyone else at the council, everyone else in the Trump administration right now is saying, oh, this Bitcoin blockchain thing is great. That in combination with all the other policies that Doge and Elon and Trump are doing, this is great for taxpayers. This is great for balancing the deficit, blah, blah, blah. This step, the step that I'm referring to, my worldview, Saylor's worldview, Lowry's worldview, is that the deficit will fail. Elon Musk and Trump will fail. You cannot crush the deficit forever. Fiat is a Ponzi scheme. It has to blow up. And you should not be viewing Bitcoin as a means of strengthening the dollar in the long term. You should be viewing the dollar as sucking everything out of the dollar as you possibly can as we begin to exit this era, right? It's 2 totally different ways of looking at it, right? We just ended step 1 before the government got involved, before we had the crypto summit, before all that happened. In that era, Bitcoin went from 6 cents to $109,000. We are now in this era, the financialization of Bitcoin as a store of value. I believe this period is very optimistic and it's very bullish, given the fact these guys are so heavily invested, given the fact that the White House has a very clear and distinct Bitcoin reserve versus digital stockpile. I think this is super, super optimistic. I think Bitcoin easily goes to millions, if not tens of millions of dollars in the coming years, and realistically, probably decade plus, multiple decades even. But eventually, in the far future, far beyond Trump's administration, what we're going to see is an era, in my opinion, well beyond most of our comprehensions. This is the era where all models break and you proverbially burn the bridges, right? This is the period of time where the government realizes, wait a minute, we are buying a little more Bitcoin here and there, and that's something that's budget friendly for the country, where we're not costing taxpayers, blah, blah, blah. That's their mindset, okay? The stage 3 mindset I'm talking about, right? Like the Michael Saylor triple maxi mindset is, we got to print as much money as possible. We got to raise as much debt as possible, issue as much as possible. Who cares about what it costs the taxpayers? Who cares? Like, if we don't do this, like, this is like World War II level, like, do or die moment. Like, if we don't control block space, if we don't control coins, if we don't run our own nodes, if we don't mine, if we don't have influence in this network, we will effectively cease to have influence in the future, right? Two totally different mindsets, and I do not think we're at that third mindset, but that's why I'm watching these 4 individuals, because if in the next 4 to 5 years, they start to flip from viewing Bitcoin as a positive accretion value to the nation and more of a absolutist end game kind of mindset, that's where I'll start getting very nervous. Maybe, really where the whole thing goes off the rails is where we start printing money to buy Bitcoin. That's where all bets are off. Who knows what happens next? Now, again, to clarify, I have not clarified this yet, and I want to clarify it because a lot of people that aren't in Bitcoin are very critical, right? This is something a lot of people are very critical about, is how is this going to help our 401ks? This is, people reacting to the summit, by the way. This is, the non-Bitcoin crowd. People are very negative to this. Oh, it's just a bunch of insiders. It's like literally every single comment is very, very negative. Why is this happening? I don't understand, blah, blah, blah. Because these people don't understand that this is actually good for the dollar. And it's ironically good for inflation in the short term, in the medium term, right? In this middle period, Bitcoin is going to greatly help the dollar continue to have dominance. In the long term, obviously, eventually Bitcoin will kill the dollar. But in the same way the internet helped the radio and newspaper companies hobble along and survive for at least another decade longer until eventually it killed them, it's the same kind of idea here, right? The best way to strengthen the US dollar and the bond market, which are faltering over the last 3 to 4 years, the best way to strengthen that is with pristine collateral. That is Bitcoin. Eventually, of course, pristine collateral will collapse the dollar entirely, but for now, it's the best way to affect it. So a lot of people are very critical of this, even though they don't understand that this is the single most effective thing you can do to help prevent grocery prices from going up in the short term, not in the long term, but in the short term. So it's a lot of people are very negative, and a lot of people, even in Bitcoin, are very negative. Like, why, Luke, are you as a Bitcoiner defending the dollar, blah, blah, blah. And I'll make something very clear here, just in the middle of the video here, that defending the dollar has a human cost quantifiable in blood. To have the military to spend hundreds of billions of dollars tangibly with trillions of dollars of intangible cost and human lives, right? Like, I fully understand that having a political currency that is based on manipulation of reality, a let there be light, so to speak, kind of moment where effectively Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen are the monetary gods of 60% of the world. I get it. There's a direct human cost to fiat surviving. I understand that. However, every other political currency is less efficient. It's a higher volume of blood per monetary premium. Okay, the monetary premium the US is able to hold for the amount of blood it sacrifices of the innocent is way more efficient than what North Korea or China or other countries can do, right? And so I'm not a fan of the death and destruction of the dollar directly and more often indirectly causes, right? The United States has overthrown over 70 governments since World War II. Like, I'm not a fan of that, obviously. However, I would rather see the dollar grow in relation to other fiat currencies because ultimately I'm a maximalist on reducing the amount of preventable human suffering. And I think a world that is using more dollars and less North Korean or Chinese or Saudis or Iranian currencies, I think that's a better future. And so I'm much less interested in the idealistic dream of we want only Bitcoin adoption and blah, blah, blah. And I'm much more pragmatic about how this is going to happen. Bitcoin adoption is going to take decades in the same way the NAKAMOTO took decades, right? And so the thing I would like to see, if we're still going to be in the horse and buggy standard anyway, is let's at least have our fiat monetary empires have the least amount of destruction possible as we're waiting for the inevitable development and acceleration of the Bitcoin standard. So I want to make that very clear. And what I'm very excited about in relation of that context that I just gave here is that there are 3 things I'd like to see from Trump, and I'm very optimistic he's going to fulfill these. The first thing I would like to see is don't censor, don't regulate, and don't crush Bitcoin development, right? Again, if Bitcoin's like a locomotive, we need time. Bitcoin needs time. The Bitcoin network needs time. Bitcoin cannot handle 100 million users. Bitcoin cannot handle 1 billion users, right? We can barely handle a couple million users that we have today, right? Bitcoin needs time to scale. It needs time to have more efficient transactions. It needs time to have more efficient Bitcoin financial products. Like I keep alluding to, we'll get into this more in just a moment, but Bitcoin desperately needs these kinds of things. So my number one hope from Trump is don't censor it, don't regulate it. And even though these four individuals, Letnick, Bissett, Trump, and Sachs, in my opinion, don't fully understand Bitcoin to the extent that a triple maxi like Saylor does, I do think all of them, including Elon Musk, by the way, even though he is dead silent about Bitcoin, all of them, in my opinion, are very consistent and understanding we do not want to crush this industry. Because again, they view it from the lens of dollars, but still, they're mutually aligned in that thing I really want to see. So I'm very optimistic on that. The second thing I would like to see from Donald Trump, both now and in the coming years, to see him, accelerate Bitcoin in his worldview as the president. What I would like to see is for him to use Bitcoin, and probably more realistically, he's going to be using mostly stable coins to strengthen the US dollar. I would like to see that. I don't want to see a world where the dollar is hyperinflating in the next couple years, because guess what? Bitcoin's not ready to absorb the fallout. If we have hyperinflation, without Bitcoin as an escape valve for all the energy fleeing the United States, you get all kinds of tyranny, all kinds of destruction, and millions of people needlessly die. We saw this with the lockdowns. Millions of people died as a result of the lockdowns the United States implemented in 2020, 5 years ago this week, by the way. And so I do not want to see the dollar collapse because we're buying some sort of token that has some sort of CEO that's going to dump on us, right? So I am happy with this. I'm very happy to see that they understand the difference between Bitcoin and everything else, right? That doesn't mean everything else is necessarily a scam. Most of it is. Some things aren't, like stable coins, and perhaps some utility token has some future use case I don't fully understand. But I'm very glad to see they understand there's Bitcoin and everything else. There's energy-backed digital money, and everything else has a centralized issuer. I'm very happy to see that, so I'm very optimistic on this second point, that they understand the importance of strengthening the dollar, and they understand the importance of using stable coins to defend the dollar, right? This is something Scott Bessent said within the summit that I found was very interesting because, effectively they're, indirectly implying that, where is he? Paolo is going to be a very influential person at helping another billion people use the dollar, right? People around the world just don't have access to the dollar like you and I do. And so I'm very happy to see that. They understand and they want to accelerate Bitcoin. In my opinion, they're going to accelerate stable coins even more. Why stable coins? Because the more people in the world you have using dollars, basically the people are the proof of work, and you can create more bonds, you can create more dollars, and you can lower interest rates, which is what Donald Trump really wants, if we're honest. That's what stable coins are going to do. And Bitcoin, they're also going to accelerate Bitcoin because the more Bitcoin you have on the asset side of the balance sheet, the more you're able to borrow, the more you're able to leverage that asset side of the balance sheet. That's something that Scott also said during the summit, which I thought was very important. He was talking about how Bitcoin is going to be used for the asset side of the balance sheet. I was very happy to see that. There's a third thing I would like to see from Trump. If adversaries, in particular China, Russia, North Korea, if adversaries, other nations, or AI, which is why I wish Elon Musk would understand those, if any of those entities show signs of understanding hash war, the U.S. must respond, the U.S. must accelerate, right? If we see some rogue AI, if we see China, or if we see Putin or some other world leader understand, wait a moment, the United States is buying tens of billions of dollars worth of locomotive stock, I should just buy up all the iron in the world, all the wheels in the world, all the rails, I should buy up everything, right? Basically, instead of viewing the locomotives as a means to help the horses, like I said before, let's just dominate this, right? Let's just burn the bridges, burn the boats, let's destroy our monetary premium. And I think of the candidates most likely to do this, I think Putin's the most likely to do this. The United States censored over $500 billion worth of Putin's bonds a few years ago when the Ukraine war started. Putin has already floated the idea of having oil and Russian exports, be priced in Bitcoin. So that's something I would definitely want to see. If Putin transitions from, right now, Donald Trump's over here thinking, oh, we can leverage Bitcoin to get more dollars. If Putin jumps ahead in understanding a few more years ahead of Trump, and he understands, well, why don't I just crush the ruble, right? Why don't I just go full Michael Saylor and just collapse the monetary premium of my country to buy more Bitcoin, right? Instead of, like the United States, kind of dipping their toes in and saying, oh, we'll get Bitcoin if it's, neutral for taxpayers and if blah, 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 right? Like if we see an AI or if we see Putin or somebody else go full hash war and start to burn the proverbial bridges, that's where I would definitely want to see Donald Trump respond. I don't know if Donald Trump would or not. On one hand, he's very he's like a bull in a china shop, and so he's very firm. We've seen that with the Ukraine and Russia negotiations right now. Whether you love that or hate that, that's just how he is. Donald Trump's very competitive. I would hope Trump would follow through with this, not for the sake of me praising Trump, but for the sake of the country and having as much hash as possible within the United States instead of a nation that's even more tyrannical. So anyway, I'm very happy with how the summit went because I was previously confident of number one. I was already confident that Trump wasn't going to regulate Bitcoin and crypto and stable coins like Biden seemed to be going down that route. I was already happy and confident with that. I'm now much more confident with number two. And for me, this is the main takeaway I have from this event, is that it's very clear to me the administration understands the difference between digital gold and the other digital tokens, digital securities like XRP, Ethereum, whatever. I'm very happy to see that. And I'm also very happy to see that they are getting into stablecoins. Stablecoins are not mentioned in the executive order, which surprises me, but it was definitely mentioned repeatedly during the summit. And my big concern, given the fact that those first two things I'm happy with, my big concern is that number three is still going to take years to understand from now. I do have that concern. And my hope is that they figure it out. And one of the people, probably the most likely person to help them figure it out, of course, Michael Saylor and Jason Lowery. In my opinion, Michael Saylor, each of them have their pros, each of them have their cons, each of them have differences of opinion. Obviously, Saylor's a way more famous person right now to them. But I think this is something Michael Saylor understands. This is his letter to the White House, to the Trump administration, in regards to the summit and all that. So this is Saylor's letter. Saylor emphasizes the difference between the four main kinds of digital tokens. You have digital tokens, digital securities, digital currencies, digital commodities. Of course, Bitcoin is a digital commodity. He is a maxi. He is highlighting and bolding the without an issuer component of a digital commodity. This is Saylor's obsession and focus to help the United States understand this distinction, which again is why I'm so pleasantly surprised David Sachs has been clearly picking up on Saylor's transmissions and therefore relaying those transmissions to Trump. I'm very happy to see that. What Saylor recommends for the government is to expand the digital currency. We export the currency to the world. This is stablecoin. Think Tether. Think having another billion people use the US dollar. Basically, what, in my opinion, Michael Saylor wants to see is the U.S. regulate these two things. Regulate these two. Saylor doesn't really care about them, in my opinion. What Saylor wants to see is a digital currency. What he wants to see is a digital commodity. That's what Saylor wants to see, and I think he's being successful at relaying that message to the people in power, predominantly Sachs, Lutnick, and Bissett. What Saylor recommends for the United States is for the United States to acquire between 5 to 25% of the Bitcoin network before 2035. So he's got a target number range and a target date. He wants the United States to own between a 20th to a 4th of all the coins in the network before 2035. Why? Because in late 2034 is when Bitcoin hits the 99% mark, where the final century or so will be chasing that last 1% of Bitcoins to be issued to the network. So, again, Saylor is carefully crafting this message, this letter, and all of his public appearances to make sure to frame it in language they can understand, right? Saylor, in my opinion, again, I have my own opinions because I've talked with them extensively. I don't think Trump understands Bitcoin to the degree I've been talking about, Saylor's talking about, right? Even during the conference, to quote Donald Trump, never sell your Bitcoin. That's a little phrase they say. I don't know if they're right or not. Who the hell knows? Blah, blah, blah. So, in my opinion, Donald Trump doesn't spend his middle of the night hours thinking about how America can buy more Bitcoin. I think he walks in, thinks about it, talks about it, says what's in front of him. He's positive about it, gives them a thumbs up and leaves. So I think that's great. I think that's what Bitcoin needs right now. In fact, it may even be better for Bitcoin. But after having interacted with Saylor, 4 or 5 times in person, he invited, like I said earlier, he invited me and Paolo to dinner, which was very funny to watch him in the panel because it's just how he acts. But anyway, having that conversation with them, I can say very firmly, in my opinion, they don't care about these two. They don't care about digital tokens and securities. The reason they're not hostile against these in public is because they don't want to be alienated or ostracized by the individuals within the Trump administration that are probably more favorable. I would argue David Sachs is probably more favorable to digital tokens and securities, especially given the fact David Sachs was a VC investor in a digital security and dumped it on the, so like I think they're being very strategic of differentiating and condemning by separation, but not explicitly. So in my opinion, Powell is really important for the digital currency aspect, and that's why Saylor is trying to push him really hard. That's how I think, it's very exciting to see Tether being embraced by the US government. And the digital commodity component, that's very, very bullish for Bitcoin. We're looking at tens of trillions of dollars of wealth for the United States Treasury by the 2040s, assuming Saylor's model for Bitcoin continues, assuming Bitcoin becomes 5 to 7% of global wealth, which is just something crazy to think about how stupid early we are. Yes, we've missed the early period, we've missed step one. It's not stupid early anymore because now the government's involved, now the US is involved, but it's still really early, because this is the period where they're only beginning to dip their toes into learning about the locomotive and starting to understand it, starting to leverage it as a way to defend the dollar, which is going to be what they'll do to stack tens of trillions of dollars of wealth for the United States government. And so hopefully what I think is going to happen is that they follow Saylor, they follow the call to action, they understand this, they begin having the Trojan horse happen to them, and eventually they realize, oh wait, we never want to sell the Bitcoin to pay off the debt, because the debt is inherently unsustainable. The debt inherently has to collapse. It's a mathematical certainty. It must end someday. So let's continue on. What do I think is the most probable way Trump fumbles the ball? I think the most likely way Trump fumbles the ball from here, I'm very happy with everything so far, but the way he fumbles the ball from here is if he fails to see Bitcoin as stronger than the dollar. Eventually, the USA will need to pivot from using Bitcoin to defend the dollar towards sacrificing the dollar to defend Bitcoin, right? Again, this is a really important distinction. A lot of people right now are blindly saying, oh, all these guys understand Bitcoin. It's like, yes, they do. They understand Bitcoin. Maybe, if Saylor's at 11th grade level or college degree level, these guys get it. I think that's great. I think they're learning. I think they're learning quickly, which is why I'm paying attention to them, trying to keep up with how fast are they learning based on reading between the lines. But they're still at that moment where they're thinking, yeah, locomotives are great. I'm a huge fan of locomotive technology. Let's use it. And we can use all those proceeds to keep our horses going, right? They don't even understand that the locomotive is competition for the horse yet. In my opinion, I don't think they do. They view it as a means of strengthening it. So I do think that moment is going to take years, though. I think it's going to take many years, if not decades, because I think this whole charade is going to last a lot longer than what a lot of people in Bitcoin would like to admit. But I think it's going to take a long time. And so effectively, in my opinion, for what Trump needed to do for Bitcoin in his administration, in my opinion, I think he's already done it. Like, he might be done. Like, if Trump does nothing else for Bitcoin besides those three things, just not get involved, not overregulate, let people that are competent and invest in Bitcoin accumulate more Bitcoin for the United States. And, I highly doubt we're going to reach this kind of hash war phase 3 era in the next 4 or 5 years during administration. I could be wrong about that, but effectively, I think Trump's kind of done it, and I'm happy. And dude, leave it alone. He's very controversial, so maybe the more he talks about it, the worse it'd actually be for Bitcoin. I don't know, but where we go from here, realistically, in my humble opinion, is that in the near term, the government dramatically expands and entrenches stablecoins. Probably Tether is a big part of that. And Bitcoin-backed bonds. Tether already is one of the largest buyers of U.S. treasuries, and I think they're going to expand those treasuries. I think they're going to expand those bonds for the sake of defending the proverbial horse, preserving the bonds, preserving the dollar. They don't care about having enough hash rate. They don't care about understanding Bitcoin as a matter of strategic importance. They care about how low can we lower interest rates? How can we leverage Bitcoin to save the mortgage market? How can we leverage Bitcoin to do this, to do that, right? That's the way they're viewing it. So I think in the midterm, maybe the next 1 to 10 to 20 years, they're going to dramatically expand the stable coins. I think they're going to focus less on the digital tokens. I think they're going to focus more on the stable coins. In the long term, multiple decades, if not a century, the non-American political currencies eventually have to collapse into the dollar, right? The other political currencies around the world, of the hundreds of countries that don't have the same wealth and military of the United States, obviously they're going to collapse into the dollar before the dollar collapses into Bitcoin, in my opinion. It's just that's what they're going to do, right? In the same way that MicroStrategy stock, now known as Strategy, will eventually collapse back into Bitcoin, all the other tech stocks are going to collapse into MicroStrategy first, right? MicroStrategy is a trade, right? It's in terms of Bitcoin, right? Everything else trends to 0 against Bitcoin. MicroStrategy, now Strategy, trends to 1 in Bitcoin, right? And so the same way, MicroStrategy is the Trojan horse absorbing monetary premium from the rest of the stock market and plowing it into Bitcoin. It's the same kind of idea here, in my opinion, where the US is going to leverage stablecoins to absorb the monetary premium of the non-American political currencies. In the meantime, strengthen the dollar and strengthen, our bonds and lower interest rates and blah, blah, blah. Eventually, of course, it all flows to Bitcoin. Bitcoin's monetary singularity, it's a closed system, right? Once energy enters the black hole, it doesn't come out, right? The United States is a much bigger planet than the little moons and satellites of the other countries. And so, yes, eventually energy flows to gravity. The small planets collide with the big planets, and it helps the big planet get bigger and stronger. But eventually, even the tiniest black hole will absorb the entirety of the largest planet. It's the same kind of idea here. America's got a bigger pile of political energy. They're going to leverage Bitcoin to strengthen that political energy and crush political foes around the world and strengthen the dollar and bonds as a function of weakening other dollars and bonds, because political currency is a zero-sum game, but eventually it all flows back to Bitcoin. So yes, in the long term, eventually the dollar will disappear. It's, my opinion, going to take at least multiple decades. It may even take a century. It's going to take a very, very long time. But I do think this event will be remembered as a very historic moment. It's like, dang, do you guys remember? Like right now we're all excited about it in our tiny little bubble, but in the future, people are going to look back at this moment and say, man, like that was the very beginning of the U.S. adopting Bitcoin when the U.S. was still using the dollar, right? It's like we're so very early. It's going to be a very historic event that's going to be remembered a very long period of time from now. So, my opinion of what these guys think, there's really these three kind of levels. Most people, we were looking at the comments earlier. I think it's great to like pause the video and like read some of these comments, because the comments are almost entirely negative, almost entirely hateful. These are people that are so early to understand, and I'm not making fun of them. It's just important to remember this, because in the future, this will all seem obvious. Oh, everybody was into it. Everybody, everybody voted for Trump, and, he won the popular vote, and he had the Bitcoin bill, and he had all this funding, and blah, blah, blah. The average person just doesn't care. Why? Because the average person cares about what their grocery bill is, and they don't understand how this Bitcoin thing has all this nuance and feedback loops eventually to help. So most people, the layman, is saying, now that the government is buying Bitcoin, surely the top is in, and Bitcoin at $86,000 is too expensive, man. Bitcoin didn't even pump on the crypto reserve news, man. The cycle's over, man. It's going back down to 20 grand. Bitcoin's a bubble for the cronies. Look at all these corrupt people, all these self-invested, interested people with billions of dollars of Bitcoin just trying to pump the price, being an exit, trying to turn the voters into exit liquidity. What a bunch of morons and retards and scammers and blah, 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 whatever, right? Now, in my opinion, the people in question here, predominantly Sachs, Musk, Lutnick, and Trump, as well as Percent, the way they view Bitcoin, and they understand it, is that Bitcoin is a good asset, digital gold, for the wealth of the nation to invest in, because digital gold is going to $1 million. Bitcoin is a tool to help the dollar and American business. And in my opinion, where I'm looking now that this has happened, where I'm focused on, and where we can actually start talking about a deca or multi-deca $1 million Bitcoin, and no longer a 100 grand, 500 grand, $1 million Bitcoin, is the Bitcoin maxi kind of view. Bitcoin is something the United States should continue to explore aggressively before other nations do, right? That's what they're saying in public. That's what Saylor's saying in public, that, hey, the United States should aggressively be acquiring Bitcoin. But in private, what I think they would actually say if they were pressed is that global hash war that's going to last 1,000 years is imminent. The global competition of 100 trillion AIs competing 24/7, 365, forcing the marginal cost of production down to zero. Like, human labor is not going to be competitive. Our weapons are not going to be competitive, right? This is full on Nikola Tesla, the problem of increasing human energy paper, all the way back in 1899. Like, this is the moment. Bitcoin is the digital chessboard for the next millennia of human technological progress. And it's a imperative for national security we have a say in that, because otherwise AIs and empires with technology we can't even fathom are going to force us out. Bitcoin is the only assurance we have of surviving in that kind of digital future where we don't even know what we're creating anymore, right? This is a global hash war, imminent, for digital power projection in cyberspace against all malicious and beneficial AIs. To fumble this ball is to cause wars and tyrannies we cannot yet comprehend, and we have less than a decade to stay ahead, right? At least that's what Michael Saylor believes, and I would agree with him. I think we got years, maybe a decade, but not much further than that. And this is the kind of talk where we are inherently no longer talking in terms of dollars. We're talking in terms of energy. We're talking in terms of long-term purchasing power. This is a once in civilization moment, right? So those are the different kinds of worldviews, right? Again, you may feel like you're too late to Bitcoin because, oh, well, the reserve just happened and surely it can't pump anymore. But again, 99% of people are in this top period. 99% of people think, oh, this is just another Beanie Babies moment. They're just trying to pump it up another 30% so they can make a quick $1 million, blah, 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 whatever, right? There's a small percentage of the world, maybe 1%, that's starting to view Bitcoin as this kind of digital gold thing. I would argue there's less than 1 million people that understand this third component that we're talking about here, that, wait a minute, Bitcoin is not just a tool. It's not just another asset in a diversified portfolio. This is something totally different. Most people look at Bitcoin, the black hole that is Bitcoin, and they say, well, this black hole has about the same mass as every other planet out there, so probably most people are going to have a diversified portfolio between all of them. They don't understand that the black hole eats everything. You can't stop it. And any amount of energy used to fight it is just going to get absorbed. This is the monetary singularity. So I've been talking a lot, but let's get to some fun little pictures here. So we'll get to the video, but it's very funny for me seeing Michael Saylor during this video because it reminds me of when he and I had dinner. He likes to fidget. When he's not talking and he's sitting idly, he fidgets a lot. He doesn't stop moving. He's tapping things, moving things around. He's, scratching his head. He just doesn't stop. And so it's very funny to see him during the summit do that. The first third of the summit, Donald Trump was talking about this big trophy, and it was funny to see Saylor have his quirks during that. That was very funny to see. And it was funny also to see him take pictures of the event, being the only guy in this whole panel that was, he cracked a joke at the start of it about his orange tie, and he was taking pictures and just, looking around. He seemed compared to everyone else, he seemed a little more uncomfortable, a little more unsettled, which I found very funny, just wondering what's going through his head, right? In my opinion, he's probably thinking about come on, let's keep it moving. This is really important. And everyone else is just thinking, oh yeah, this is another industry to talk about, another industry to promote. So, anyway, I do want to get to the videos here because this, discussion already is getting quite long, but there's a lot of nuance here and I'm really glad I'm covering it. Really quick, I want to also highlight this post from David Sachs. I think if you want more to read, this is something very useful to read. Again, the best way to get an idea of what's going through Donald Trump's mind, in my opinion, is to pay attention to what David Sachs is saying. And so I think this is something very interesting. I also think it's very interesting. Michael Saylor is presumably going to be one of the people that is influencing David and therefore influencing Trump and Lutnick and Bissent, trying to help them think of ways to buy more Bitcoin. So I'm definitely very, very optimistic on that. I'm really glad Saylor's there. Saylor is the most effective Bitcoin advocate in the world right now, even if you have disagreements with him, which I certainly do. But I'm glad it's him that is in the ear of Sachs, Bissent, and Lutnick that's ultimately going to be the ones that help determine Trump what's the direction to go from here. Because again, I don't really think Trump is thinking this through. And that's not a dig. It's just I don't think he's thinking it through. I think he's outsourcing his thoughts to these, again, important people around him, which is why I'm paying more attention to them than to Trump. So let's get on to the video. But before we get on the video and wrap up this, before we get on to reaction to the video, I want to talk about your own strategic Bitcoin reserve. You've been hearing me talk a lot already, now over an hour, about things outside of your control. Let's talk about something inside of your control. You have the opportunity right now to make your own strategic Bitcoin reserve, right? Again, yes, we're done with era one, we're done with step one, but we have years, maybe a decade, where the government begins to understand Bitcoin, but they haven't fully gone all in and started burning the boats, right? This is your chance to get your own railroad company. This is your chance to get your own strategic Bitcoin reserve. One of the most effective ways to do that is to not only have the pristine collateral, but have pristine security setups for that collateral, right? This is why I have been advocating for multi-jurisdictional, multi-sig vaults with zero single point of failure that are escrow compatible for years now, okay? A lot of people don't fully understand why I've been advocating for this still, right? A lot of people don't understand. They say it's too expensive. They say it's too complicated. They say, I don't need that yet. I don't think people understand that the most effective way to increase your stockpile and to get more Bitcoin and to make the most money for the least amount of effort, the best way to do that is to not only have the pristine collateral, but the pristine asset setup. Because the better your self-custody setup, not only the lower risk do you have of losing the Bitcoin, but the more financial products you're going to have available to you. Products that are lower risk, products that are cheaper, and products that better help you, and products you're going to be able to have access to first before everyone else. This on the screen here is something that is only going to become available for clients of the Bitcoin Advisor. Why? Not because we're better, not because we're a financial services company. We are explicitly not a financial services company, but because our clients have this lower risk Bitcoin vault setups, right? You don't want to get a multi-sig vault because it's going to lower your rate of risk. Yes, you do want it for that reason, but the real reason you want it is because you're going to make more money having this kind of vault, right? Let me give some specific examples. Okay, coming soon, there are loan products coming soon, Bitcoin denominated loans with single-digit interest rates, with zero margin call, zero over collateralization, zero counterparty risk. Okay, that are relatively long-term loans, right? We're looking at not weeks or months, we're looking at a year or more, right? And this is the worst it's ever going to be, right? A couple years from now, the interest rates will be lower, the terms will be even longer, right? But guess who gets the first dibs of all those financial products coming down the line? The people with this kind of self-custody setup. If you have Bitcoin on Coinbase, you're not going to get this setup. Yes, you can borrow against your Bitcoin in Coinbase. You can have a fiat denominated loan in Coinbase, but guess what? You have a higher interest rate. There's counterparty risk, and that counterparty risk eats up the risk of your loan, right? Let's say there's a 3% chance that Coinbase loses your Bitcoin or they go under or they're censored by the government, okay? If you over collateralize the loan 2 to 1, that means that on top of your interest rate, you also have to add in 6% of intangible rate of risk because you got the 3% for the half you're borrowing plus the 3% that you're using as over collateral, right? And so it's totally different having 8% in a low risk Bitcoin denominated loan setup versus maybe 10 to 12 to 15 to 17 freaking percent on some sort of other setup where there's counterparty risk and you don't hold your own keys, plus all the intangible risk of that counterparty blowing up. Like, we have less in common with the near future in the past. These products are going to change the game. These products are going to really what hyper accelerates Bitcoin price, right? And even if you personally don't want a Bitcoin loan, it's still worth paying attention to these kinds of products because these are the things that are going to send Bitcoin, send this locomotive to millions, if not tens of billions of dollars. Right now, the only ways to have the liquidity of your Bitcoin is effectively to sell it. Right? That's why we see selling pressure, right? That's why even on the news of the most bullish thing in Bitcoin in years, people are dumping Bitcoin because they're selling it because they want to take profits, right? This is the kind of product where you're going to be able to have buy, borrow, die. This is the kind of product where you're going to be able to live on your Bitcoin forever without ever having to sell it, without ever having to have a tax hit on it, right? It's something a lot of people were disappointed in, apparently, is that they, for whatever reason, thought that, oh, Trump's going to magically wave a wand, there'll be no more capital gains tax on Bitcoin, right? It's like, this is a way to defer capital gains tax effectively, right? This is a way to do that, right? I got to be careful of my language here, but this is a way to legally, within the realm of the law, without evading the government at all, still have your keys separate from the government in multiple jurisdictions. That's ironically lower risk. Like, it's just such an obvious setup to me, and most people, I don't think, understand the implications of what I'm walking through here. So, hopefully all of you watching and subscribing to my channel will eventually figure this out. There's 30 to 50,000 people that follow me on my social media accounts, and I really hope I have the time to help as many of you as possible. But these things are coming. They're coming really quickly. It's very exciting. If you have any interest in having access to these kinds of products specifically when they're rolled out in the near-term future here, as well as all kinds of other products that are only going to be available for people with multi-jurisdictional, multi-sig vaults that are escrow compatible with zero single point of failure, right? Text the phone number on the screen, Bitcoin loans or whatever you're interested in specifically. I'm happy to help, happy to answer questions. But the big deal here, the thing I really want to emphasize for everyone watching this, is you must reduce your single points of failure in your Bitcoin self-custody because you are taking on a stupid amount of risk by neglecting and procrastinating your Bitcoin self-custody. right? If you have Bitcoin on an exchange, if you have Bitcoin in a single point of failure, you are risking the generational wealth for your spouse, for your children, for your business, for your church. You are neglecting it. You are having intolerably high downside risks with your Bitcoin. And guess what? Not only do you reduce your downside risk when you eliminate your single points of failure, which is the obvious thing, also, you get better offers to you. You get better terms for you that are lower risk. Because guess what? The lenders, the insurance companies, everyone out there, who do they want? They want the clients that are going to be lower risk, and they also want the clients that are the bigger clients, right? And of course, the people with the better security are the ones that are the bigger clients. So my point is, if you want to not only have pristine collateral, but a pristine custody solution, this is why I'm advocating for this. I've been saying multi-sig for years. People have mostly been ignoring me. That's okay, because I understand most people ignore the Bitcoin message, and likewise, most people are ignoring or neglecting the multi-sig thing. But it's like, it is cheaper to have a service that lowers your risk because you save so much more money on products, right? Like, have it done, do the work, put in the hours, put in the money, because guess what? You're going to get products available to you 2 years before everyone else, and those products are going to be 50%. In this case, like literally 5 times cheaper, right? Like other Bitcoin loans that are fiat denominated, they have over collateralization, counterparty risk, margin call risk, plus interest rates that are 2 to 4 times higher. Well, 2 to 3 times higher than the interest rate shown here. Like, I mean, it's not even comparable. So give the phone number on a screen of text. There's also information in the link in the description below, as well as information link in the description below. You can email me, you can book a call, you can text the phone number screen, whatever you want to do, I don't care. But without a further ado, let me stop rambling about this stuff that you should take action on, but most of you won't. Let's get to the videos. Let's actually react to the crypto summit. There's a few things I want to comment on here that I think are really, really important. So we will start with something that I found very funny, which was Michael Saylor commenting on his orange tie to everyone. Everyone looked over at him, and it's funny, having known him, watched him for hundreds of hours online, and spent, whatever, half a dozen hours with him in person and across the table from him. He's very quirky, and yeah, he definitely looks like a little bit of a fish out of water. And it's funny, I think it's a silly little metaphorical signal that, yeah, he's the maxi at the table. Sorry, I'm wearing my orange tie.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Thank you very much, everyone. Great honor to have you. I know you've all been working very hard and very successfully. And it's a wonderful place, the White House. I want to begin, is Johnny here from World Cup? I want to thank you for the selection. And they just had a presentation in the Oval Office, and I thought this was such a beautiful, this is the trophy. This is the big deal. The World Cup is the biggest sporting event. And
here's what I was talking about when they start talking about the trophy. This isn't related to Bitcoin. It's just very funny to see Michael being the one that's like taking all the pictures and looking around and just fidgeting. I just find it very funny. He's probably thinking like, come on, let's talk about Bitcoin.
And welcome to the first ever White House Digital Assets Summit. I know that many of you have been fighting for years for this, and it's an honor to be with you at the White House. I want to thank the White House AI and crypto czar David Sachs, Treasury Secretary. This is David right here, in case you don't know. You know David. And the man who's doing a great job as Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, who's right here. Scott, thank you very much. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, wherever you may be, Howard. Hi, Howard. He's doing some interesting work right now with all that's going on. He's right in the middle of it and doing a great job. Make America the Bitcoin superpower of the world and the crypto capital of the planet. And We're taking historic action to deliver on that promise, as you know, around the table. Yesterday, I signed an executive order officially creating our strategic Bitcoin reserve, and this will be a virtual Fort Knox for digital gold to be housed within the United States Treasury. That's a big thing, Scott. The federal government is already among the largest holders of Bitcoin, as you know. Really one of the largest holders in the world, with as many as 200,000 Bitcoin obtained via civil law and various other forms of law, and including enforcement actions. These existing holdings will form the foundation of the new reserve. Unfortunately, in recent years, the U.S. government has foolishly sold tens of thousands of additional Bitcoin that were worth billions and billions of dollars had they not sold them, but they did sell them, mostly during the Biden administration. And not a good thing to have done. From this day on, America will follow the rule that every Bitcoin knows very well: never sell your Bitcoin. That's a little phrase that they have. I don't know if that's right or not. Who the hell knows? Who knows? Who knows? But so far, it's been right. And well, let's keep it that way.
Okay, so lots of applause there. Who the hell knows? But, again, it's just, I think that's just the reality. I don't think Trump is giving Bitcoin any thought. He's very busy, obviously. Same thing with Elon Musk, by the way. They're very busy. I genuinely don't think they care about it. I genuinely don't think they really think about it. They care about what it can bring them, which for them, what it can bring them, what it can bring for Trump is voter support, more donations from the crypto lobby, and hey, if it can help the American dollar and strengthen the dollar, well then why not, right? So, in my opinion, between that comment and the comments he made while signing the executive order, I think he's just reading off the paper. I think he believes what he reads, but it's a bit of a tell of where his education is with it.
The Treasury and Commerce Departments will also explore new pathways to accumulate additional Bitcoin holdings for the reserve, provided it's done at no cost to the taxpayers. We don't want any cost to the taxpayers. In addition, my order directs federal agencies to conduct an inventory of all crypto assets currently held by the U.S. government and determine how they can be transferred easily to the Treasury. Non-Bitcoin digital assets will be held in a new U.S. digital asset stockpile where they will be managed properly. My administration also is working to end the federal bureaucracy's war on crypto, which was really going on pretty wildly during Biden until the election came about. About 5 months before the election, he became a big fan because he heard how many people were in favor of it and how many people love it and respect it. But I guess it didn't work out too well for him. People understood what was going on and paved the way for groundbreaking innovations in institutional finance. Under the Bitcoin administration, regulators strong-armed banks. I mean, they really did. They strong-armed banks into closing the accounts of crypto businesses and entrepreneurs, effectively blocking some money transfers to and from exchanges, and they weaponized government against the entire industry. But I know that feeling also. Maybe better than you do. All of that will soon be over, and we are ending Operation Choke Point 2.0.
Here, here.
Some people really suffered. It was ridiculous what they were doing, but in the end...
Yeah, so this goes back to what I was saying earlier with my Twitter response, is that these are the two things that really, I think, are within Trump's control. Again, to refresh your memory, number one is don't get in the way, let the industry grow. Number two is, what was number two? Number two was buy more Bitcoin and stack more Bitcoin. Number three was eventually, if there's a hash war, focus on that, right? So again, I think these are the two things during Trump's administration that I'm glad he's doing. Just get out of the way, buy some Bitcoin, don't lose the darn thing. The government's going to have their multi-sig vaults in the same way you should have your multi-sig vaults. So as long as they're just keeping the dollar strong, not letting the dollar hyperinflate, even if it means leveraging Bitcoin to do that. I think it's very good. Like Trump said, it's just crazy for me watching, having been here for years. It's crazy watching the president of the United States, the most famous person in the world, say, we want to buy more Bitcoin. In this kind of very direct media presence. That's just, that's very, it's a little surreal. I don't know what else to say about it. And I'm glad that he's put Lutnick and Bissett in charge of that, because we'll get into Lutnick's opinions and a video of him in just a moment.
I also want to express my strong support for the efforts of lawmakers in Congress as they work on bills to provide regulatory certainty for dollar-backed stablecoins and the digital assets market. They're working very hard on that. This is a tremendous opportunity for economic growth and innovation in our financial sector, and will really go a long way. I think it's going to be a tremendous, we feel like pioneers in a way, of tremendous method of growth, and things are very much tied, and we want to keep it that way, the US dollar, long into the future. We're going to keep it that way. I hope lawmakers will send that legislation to my desk before August recess if they can, and they're very much working with you, and you know a lot of them, and a lot of them were committed right from the very beginning. So I just want to congratulate you all for being at the White House today, and a man who knows more about Bitcoin and AI and just about everything else than anybody, David Saxon. I'd like to have you say a few words, David.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're all here today because of your leadership, your vision, and your generosity, and I really want to thank you for that. We're also here because of your desire to make America great and to introduce a golden age in America, including for digital assets. And we're here because of your love of innovators.
Okay, so I'm cutting out a long part of the conference here because David basically just, praises Trump and all that, which I get. I mean, fine. Like I said, David and Trump are pretty close because David's raised a lot of money for Donald. But what Trump just said there about the stable coins, again, I don't know how much he understands the nuances and feedback loops of what he's actually starting here and kickstarting, but I do think he understands that stable coins are a way to strengthen the dollar, and I think that's his big focus and why, the main reason why he's embracing this, right? Obviously, he's embracing it for himself directly because crypto helped get him elected, but then for the sake of the United States, I think he genuinely believes and understands that stable coins are going to help. So good to see that they're commenting on that. They commented on Bitcoin first, and they're commenting on stable coins second.
David, so today, when President Trump has signed the executive order to establish the strategic Bitcoin reserve and stockpile, we're going to position the United States as a leader among nations in the digital asset strategy. It's important for the United States to recognize this fact and get ahead of the other nations in the digital age. We applaud the President's direction to use the digital assets already in the possession of the nation, and we are going to establish this Bitcoin reserve. We will use this authority to augment the asset side of the United States balance sheet. As I've said many times, President Trump is creating assets for the American people, while most past presidents have created debt. And a large part of this asset program can be in digital assets.
Why the whole first, half hour of this video I've been talking about these individuals and their opinions, because again, these are not just worldviews to have for this specific summit, but going forward in the coming years, that's why I'm focusing on these people. Right now, the language, Besant's language, is all about how do we stockpile a diversified portfolio of assets to strengthen bonds, dollars, taxpayers, the U.S. government, right? They don't yet understand that Bitcoin is cannibalizing all the other assets, and eventually it's going to be the only thing left. But, that's why, that's my understanding from everything they're reading. I also get that feeling from, watching Besant on various news podcasts, that they want more stable coins. They want Bitcoin for the sake of the dollar. They want locomotives, and they want stock and locomotive companies for the sake of having the profits and rolling those profits into being able to afford more horses, right? They want the internet. They want to expand the internet and own a share of the internet so they can use it to strengthen their monopoly over newspapers and radio. They don't yet understand that the internet is what makes that entire model obsolete.
And we are going to put a lot of thought into the stablecoin regime, and as President Trump has directed, we are going to keep the U.S. the dominant reserve currency in the world, and we will use stablecoins to do that. Thank you.
technology is at the foundation of the Trump presidency. He understands technology, he embraces technology, and he's going to use technology to drive America forward. The blockchain and Bitcoin technology are a key part of that thinking, and embracing that, and here today shows how much a leader the Trump administration and our president is. He understands it, he embraces it. As you said, you're a pioneer in this place, and this is where we're going. We're using the blockchain, we're using Bitcoin, we're going to use digital assets to pound forward, and Donald Trump is leading the way. Can't be more proud of you today.
Thank you very much.
Yep. So again, I'm favorable of these guys. I'm glad they're pioneering this path. Again, from the language you've spoken in the summit, as well as in their writings, in their Twitter posts, and on their news appearances. Again, I think the big focus is very broad. The goal is very much eliminate government waste in their eyes, and strengthen the taxpayer. And so I think it's very much using Bitcoin for the political means, which is directionally correct. But I'll be definitely changing my tune when they change their tune and they start to view Bitcoin more in that kind of absolutist, like, this is it, we got to burn the boats.
I thought it was very important that we stay in the front of this one. This is a big one. And as you know, China is pushing forward and very strongly as usual. But we're way in the lead, as we are in AI and other things, and we want to stay there. So I thought this was very important, and we have some brilliant people sitting around this table. And it's an honor to have you involved, but we want to stay at the forefront of everything. And this is a very important day in your lives. I know you worked, some of you, very long before people really understood what was happening. And so I congratulate you, but this is a big day. Being in the White House is a big deal, and you have great support. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, please. Thank you very much. Thank you, media. Thank you. Please.
And that was pretty much it. That was said from the summit. So nothing really specifically of substance was said at the summit, which disappointed a lot of people. Combining the lack of substance given at the summit, plus the short-term price capitulation of Bitcoin down a couple percent, it freaked a lot of people out. Like, oh, this is a big rug pull and blah, 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 whatever. Again, it's like, well, of course, talking to the cameras in public, you're going to say things that are very neutral, very vague, very broad. It's in private that the actual conversations are happening. And so again, it's not the things that were directly said from this conference that are really sticking with me. It's the things that were implied. The executive order and this crypto summit, what was clearly shown, which was a surprise to me and many other people, was the clear distinction between Bitcoin reserve, digital asset stockpile. It was the clear understanding of the importance of stablecoins, all those things. Those were the really two big things I'm so happy to see. They're differentiating between the different kinds of assets. That tells me they're listening to Sachs, who's listening to Saylor, more probably than not. That's what that tells me, and that's what tells me that probably they're going to continue in the right direction. And hopefully Michael Saylor does a good job of helping them better understand and navigate this without freaking them out and letting them on to think that Bitcoin's going to kill the dollar. So let's transition from the crypto summit and let's talk about a short little excerpt, like a 30-second excerpt of Howard Lutnick, again, CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, a couple $1 billion worth of Bitcoin and MicroStrategy stock. Let's see what he has to say about the financial industry adopting Bitcoin.
The traditional financial service companies, the big banks, the big brokerage companies, they're all going to go headfirst into Bitcoin pond. That's what's going to happen, and it's coming. It's a slow, steady process, but eventually there's going to be a CFTC chair who says, you know what, Bitcoin is a financial asset, and we're going to treat it as such. And when that happens, you're going to see Bitcoin move in a very, very strong, positive direction. So that's why I'm a fan of Bitcoin. It's going to go much higher. It always bounces around like any other financial asset, but ultimately over the next 5 years, as it gets invited into this party, up we go.
Yeah, so up we go, right? So I don't know what else you want. Like, this is very optimistic. This is very bullish for Bitcoin. You have literally the Secretary of freaking Commerce sitting there who owns $1 billion of Michael Saylor's company, who owns billions of dollars of Bitcoin, saying, like, we're going to pump this up. We're going to allow it. We're going to regulate it. We're going to let the free market come in here. We're going to let them do that, right? That's, again, I'll go back to the Bitcoin loans. That's why it's so important you strongly consider, wait a moment, I have less in common with the near future than the ancient past. I must position myself and my family actually to have generational wealth. You do not want to have generational wealth for your spouse, for your kids, for your business, for your church, or your charity. You do not want to have that kind of generational wealth in a kind of custody structure where there is a single point of failure. If you're the single point of failure, you have a $5 wrench attack, right? If you are the single point of failure, you could screw it up, have a user error, and lose it, right? The next wave of Bitcoin adopters are going to be people that are going to go one of two directions. They're either going to want institutional grade custody, which means multi-jurisdictional, multi-sig vaults, or they're going to want the ETF. I want as many of you as possible, ideally, to hold self-custody and hold your own keys because of the self-sovereignty and the lower risk situation of that. I'm not anti-ETF. I'm not anti-Howard Lutnick. I'm not anti-Cantor Fitzgerald. I'm not anti-BlackRock and Larry Fink, but self-custody is really important. And that's why I consider you, strongly encourage you to consider reaching out and we have a conversation about the multi-sig vaults, because that's what's going to be a lower risk for you, lower risk for your family, and ironically, you're going to get way more awesome financial products that you would otherwise. Why? Because you're lower risk. And the banks, the insurance companies, they want to pursue lower risk. You're going to get way cheaper kinds of products if you actually hold the underlying collateral, the pristine asset, not some sort of ETF or Coinbase or BlackRock, piece of paper claiming to be backed with the actual asset, right? So I would encourage you, listen to Howard Lutnick, man. He's the Secretary of Commerce. He's in Trump's ear. He's a trusted entity of Trump's. He is saying explicitly, Bitcoin number is going to go up. Institutions are coming, and they're going to have all kinds of lending products. And you might want to stay ahead of the curve with these kinds of things because way more is coming from where that's from. But the last clip I want to talk about here is going all the way back to David Sachs, who we talked about at the beginning of the video. David Sachs is basically Trump's Bitcoin guy. He's the guy that Trump's going to listen to, in my opinion, way more. I think there's strong evidence that David and Michael Saylor are actually having conversations, and I'm very happy to hear, because Donald Trump is not going to put in 1,000 hours to understand Bitcoin. He's going to outsource his opinions to David, and hopefully David continues to outsource his opinions to Howard Lutnick, Basent, and of course, Giga Chad, Michael Saylor. So we'll finish up this video today reacting to David's comments. I'm very optimistic and frankly pleasantly surprised. David has surprised me with how much of a maxi and how well thought through he's put together this plan. I was nervous that given the speed they were putting it together, that it might be disappointing or might have things that were conflicting in information, but really impressed with David with how consistent the message is and what he says here in this clip right here.
Yeah, we're not picking favorites, obviously, except I will say this. We do think Bitcoin is special, and I can get into the reasons
explain why. That's a great thing, yeah.
Well, Bitcoin's the original cryptocurrency. It's the first one. It's the only one that doesn't have an issuer, right? It's very decentralized. It's, in crypto, they call this the Immaculate Conception. We don't really know how it got here. We don't know who Satoshi is. It's almost mystical, you would say.
Yes.
It's the most valuable one. It has a $2 trillion market cap, and it's the most secure. It's never been hacked, right? So we're now, over 15 years into this journey, and there's been a lot of people who've been skeptical along the way, and there's been a lot of ups and downs, but here it is. I remember back in 2011, I think it's the first time I bought a Bitcoin. I think it was at $120. Now it's at $90,000. Again, there've been all sorts of wild swings along the way, but this thing just keeps chugging along. And you can think of that $2 trillion market cap as like a $2 trillion bug bounty. If there was a way to hack this, there's every incentive in the world. And by hack, I mean like to double spend, create basically a counterfeit Bitcoin, I guess would be the way for people to think about it. And
it is a miracle it hasn't been compromised. I think we can all say that.
Well, I don't know if it's a miracle. I think it's exceptional design.
Sure.
And so I think what you could say is that it's been tested in a very robust way, and there's been every incentive to basically break the encryption, and it continues to chug along. And so I think the price has gone up as the protocol has gotten more acceptance. And this is another point, is that Bitcoin is the most widely accepted as a store of value throughout the world.
Yeah.
So we do believe it should be treated special. Now, that being said, we're also creating the digital asset stockpile. So all the other digital assets...
Explain the difference between these two. So there's a digital asset stockpile. That's the picker. And then on the other side, there's a strategic reserve for Bitcoin, because we do acquire Bitcoin, we, the United States of America, when we seize from terrorists, criminals, et cetera. We do seize these. And then we often make the mistake of liquidating them when maybe we
Right.
should be holding them. Yeah. So explain that
Okay.
architecture.
So we have the reserve and we have the stockpile. So the reserve is just Bitcoin. The goal is long-term preservation. Think of it as like a digital Fort Knox for digital gold. We want to put the digital gold in there. We want to keep it secure. We never want to sell it. That's the goal of the reserve. And you're right that we've made the mistake in the past of selling this stuff. At one point in time, we had about 400,000 Bitcoin on the federal balance sheet. We sold roughly half of that for something like $360 million total. If we had held all of that, it would be worth, just that the portion we sold would be worth over 17 billion. So we made this mistake of prematurely selling Bitcoin when we should have held it. We don't want to make that mistake with regard to the rest of it. We think there's around 200,000 coins left on the federal balance sheet, but the truth is that nobody knows because we've never done a proper audit. So part of what this executive order provides is that we're going to do for the first time a government-wide accounting of the digital assets that we actually have. So,
and if digital assets emerge in some department, I don't know, the FBI seizes some, the CIA seizes some, I don't know which organization winds up having them, they're going to be legally required to report that and then put them in the reserve. Yeah.
Well, they'll be legally required to report it, and then they'll go in the reserve if there's a final adjudication. So, obviously, if those coins could go back as restitution to victims, or if the person who they were seized from wins their court case and gets them back, they're not going to go into the Federal Reserve. But if there's been a final adjudication and a final forfeiture, yes, those will go into the reserve. Anyway, that's Bitcoin. Okay, so then you got the stockpile. Let me just talk about that. So first of all, like I said, we don't know exactly what digital assets the federal government has. I've seen reports that it might have, for example, 50,000 ETH, which is Ethereum. But again, we need to get to the bottom of that. When we figure out exactly what the assets are, we're going to move them into the digital stockpile. The purpose of the stockpile is responsible stewardship. It's a place for safekeeping. It's a centralized, you could say, account under the direction of the Secretary of the Treasury. And the Secretary of the Treasury will figure out how to maximize the values of these holdings. Now, there's a couple of important differences between stockpile and reserve. So one is the reserve, the executive order actually provides that the Secretary of the Treasury will not sell the Bitcoin. Okay, we're prohibited from selling the Bitcoin. There's no such prohibition with respect to the stockpile. If the Secretary of the Treasury decides that it's in the long-term interest of the U.S. to rebalance the portfolio or change the portfolio, the Secretary has the discretion to do that.
So David, again, makes it very clear. There's a difference between the digital asset stockpile and the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. I know I've said this multiple times in the video now, but that is such a big deal that they differentiated it, because they're not going to confuse Bitcoin and crypto. They're not going to confuse tokens and securities with the commodity. They already understand Bitcoin is different. They already understand Bitcoin's energy backed and that Bitcoin hasn't been hacked like many other things have had monetary policies changed before. That's a big deal to me. That was a very pleasant surprise. To me, that signals that while they aren't yet at the burn the boats, destroy the horses so we can adopt the locomotive era, they are understanding that these are separate things, and they are understanding it in a way that I think is going to be very beneficial to the dollar. Not that I am blindly praising the dollar, but I would rather see more of the world on a dollar standard than other political currencies. So, and then this last clip, this very brief one, is a hint of things to come. Hopefully the United States is not done accumulating Bitcoin. Hopefully this is the very beginning. We have less in common with the near future than the ancient past. The self-custody methods of the future are far more in the multi-sig direction than the single-sig and exchange direction. We've got less in common with the custody future in the past, and the United States is more has got less in common with its near future than its past. We're going to accumulate way more Bitcoin in the next few years than we've accumulated the last 15 years. The ways we're going to do it are going to be entirely different.
So with respect to reserve, the EO provides that the secretaries, and I'm talking about Treasury and Commerce, they're allowed to figure out strategies to accumulate more Bitcoin for the reserve if those strategies are budget neutral and don't cost the taxpayer anything. Okay? So it's possible that we could, I'm not saying that we will, but it authorizes them to acquire more Bitcoin if they can figure out a way to do it that doesn't impact the federal budget or the deficit or taxpayers, right?